What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I want to, before we get into what this video is going to be about, display my sincere apology for the lack of content over the past couple of weeks. It has been just a little difficult to find someone for another interview. However, we do have an interview coming up for you just in a couple of minutes with someone that I can't wait to hear their story, and I'm sure you guys are just excited as I am to hear this story as well. We have an interview with Simone Rodriguez, who has a very interesting story to tell and a lot of information to pass along. So we're going to get with her in just a couple of minutes and bring her in for this interview. I hope everybody's enjoying their long holiday weekend. I know I definitely am, but I figured I'd take the time to bring this interview to you guys today. And we've got some more content coming up for you. Actually, we've got another interview in store for you coming up later on, as well as some other things going on with the channel. Before we get into the interview, I just want to remind everybody that if this is your first time and you are not subscribed to the channel, definitely hit that subscribe button and remember to ring the notification bell, because that's how you will get notified that there is new content. And of course, give this video a like and a thumbs up, because that's how we get the YouTube algorithm to share this video with anybody who has not seen any of this content for the first time. So we're going to be bringing Simone in here in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back with you shortly, and I'm looking forward to this interview, and I hope that everybody will enjoy this. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. So we are back now with Simone Rodriguez, who's going to tell us a little bit about her story and her disability and all of that stuff. So Simone, the floor is now yours.
Hi. So where should I start?
Well, you can just kind of start telling about, I guess, your disability and how it's kind of affected your life and stuff like that, and some of the things you've accomplished.
Okay, sure. That's awesome. All right. So as Chris said, my name is Simone Rodriguez. I know Chris through Downstate New York Adapt. I am a member on the Medicaid working group. And so I'll just kind of talk a little bit about my disability. I have osteogenesis imperfecta. It's a congenital bone disorder. It's also kind of commonly known as brittle bone disease. It basically, the biggest kind of impact it has is I fracture my bones pretty easily. So I've had over 200 bone fractures over the course of my lifetime, about 50% of them before the age of 5. So my mom found out during her pregnancy, and they basically did a sonogram and saw that I had already had like healed fractures, and then kind of went back in and did some tests and kind of figured that out. But yeah, so I've had it my whole life. It definitely affected me more as a kid, because before puberty, you're still growing, and your bones are just not as developed to begin with, even just for kids kind of who are breaking things more easily in general. So that was definitely challenging, and my parents are very adamant about like making sure I missed like as little school as possible, and sort of trying to adapt to that. But I had several surgeries. I was always have something broken. I use a wheelchair full time, and have been doing that since I was about 2, basically. So I always had that kind of sort of visual difference. And so, but other than that, like I went to public school. I, was as integrated as possible in terms of like extracurricular activities and other things. And then I went off to college. That was definitely challenging, because I went away to college and I didn't really have the proper home care support. And that's something that we talk about a lot in ADAPT, really fighting for everyone to have access to any of the, assistance that they need to kind of live as independently in the community as possible. So I really had a firsthand experience with that, where I wasn't receiving that support and how challenging that was. So I'm super passionate about making sure everyone has access to that. And right now I ended up moving back home, and I'm still in school. Getting a business degree at the University of Florida. I'm 1 more year left, so that's really exciting. It's almost done.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm excited about that. And I obviously do adapt with you guys. I also am involved in my local junior league chapter. So the junior league of Greater Fort Lauderdale. I live outside sort of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in a city called Hollywood. Um, and I volunteer with that chapter. I'm actually the delegate for their state public affairs committee, where we do really similar work to what we do in the Medicaid group and ADAPT, advocating for policy at the state level, mostly state and local level, for like women and children's issues. So it's kind of connected to what we do in our legislative meetings with ADAPT. And let's see what else. Oh, this semester I'm a business TA from the business class that I took in the summer. So I hope to apply to law school within the next year or two. That'll kind of be my next step once I graduate. I probably will take a year in between and do some research, probably with the business law professor, and hopefully do like some form of like unpaid internship at a law firm. I know it's been challenging because of Medicaid restrictions in terms of income to like get internships, because some of them are paid and you don't want to lose, go on buy-in before we talked about Medicaid buy-in, before you're going to be working full time, right? Because then
it's not easy.
if you stop working, you can't get it again. So
Mhm.
It's definitely been challenging kind of navigating, right? What does that career transition role look like when you're limited in so many ways by a lot of these rules? And that's part of also why I think the advocacy we do with ADAPT is so important, and like why it's so important to be like knowledgeable about all of those systems. And I'm definitely learning a lot. Oh, and I live in Florida right now. I'm originally from New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, like 10 blocks from where Nina and like Anne Elizabeth live, about 10 blocks outside of downtown Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Cobble Hill. And so I'm very familiar with that area. I hope to go back to Brooklyn at some point, in the next, probably for law school. I'd like to be back in New York City, but we'll see. That's hard too with Medicaid stuff and kind of switching and what that'll look like. And, am I going to lose services in between? We're a lot is up in the air. So there's definitely a lot of challenges to sort of go forward, but I'm looking forward to sort of working that out and sort of navigating the future.
What things can you remember throughout your, years have you really struggled with? Have you struggled with being accepted because of your disability? Has it been difficult for you in some cases? And also, I guess, how has your advocacy work that you've been doing, especially with ADAPT, helped you with your disability?
Okay, so I think some of the biggest challenges. So there's kind of two, as we think about like a more holistic model of disability. I think there's really two sets of challenges, right? You have the sort of physical challenges, and then you have the sort of social, environmental challenges. So physically, especially a lot more when I was younger, because I was fracturing so much more. But it was hard to not physically, and when you're a little kid, kids are a lot more physical in general, right? They're playing and they're running around, and so that was definitely challenging in the sense that like I felt left out, I think, of a lot of the activities that kind of the able-bodied kids could do. And socially it was difficult because the able-bodied kids could just get around a lot more easily in terms of transportation. So I get left out of like, different activities and like social things they were doing. And I had, when I was growing up, my home health care worker used to go to school with me. So, which is kind of a different arrangement. So I had my disability was pretty severe when I was really little. So I had at one point, until I was probably 6 or 7, like split shift 24-hour care. I had a lot of complications because my disability affects my bones primarily, but it is a collagen disorder technically, and so that also affects things like your lung tissue. And so I had a lot of respiratory issues as well. And so I had split shift 24-hour care, and I had my home health worker, who was actually a nurse, like a home nurse, used to go to school with me really up until I was like, I didn't need it until I was 15, but she was with me until I was 15. So that was really challenging. I think the social dynamic of that. And I know a lot of other disabled kids have paraprofessionals that like work in the same context too, where it's kind of a barrier between you and like the other kids socially.
I did.
Yeah, and that gets in the way, and that's very challenging. I think that as we kind of note with adapt, right, a lot of times it's the systemic things that are much more harmful than the actual disability in terms of like adjusting and kind of living a more integrated life. So like she would want to like go do things with my friends, and my friends didn't really want her to be involved, obviously, right? You don't want like a middle-aged woman like hanging out with you all the time.
Kind of embarrassing, I think, to have an adult.
Yeah, don't embarrass it. Exactly.
I know
But
how
it
you
was hard
feel.
because yeah, so right. But it was hard because it was also my home healthcare work, and someone I had been with my family since I was like 2 months old when I got out of the hospital. Um, it's like almost like having your grandmother coming around with you, right? So it's hard to set those boundaries, especially when you're a kid, right? And this is like an adult. So it was definitely challenging. And I think something that's pretty common for a lot of disabled kids. And then so I kind of went to that from that to like going off to college, being completely on my own, really, with no like formal support. And I really didn't know how I was going to adjust to that. Like I kind of just went into it not really having a plan, which probably wasn't smart. And I didn't go to like one of the universities that had, I know there are great programs at like Berkeley and I think University of Illinois that have they have like a program where they train students to be like certified home care workers basically, and they like part of the their disability services department. I know Kat Downs went to Illinois, and she can probably talk a little bit more to this how this program works, but I do know it's like a thing where they have like that built-in support where the school can like provide you with an aid. I didn't go to a school like that, unfortunately, and I really underestimated, I think, what kind of challenge that would be. And I think but it was really like physically exhausting and emotionally exhausting, and definitely makes me appreciate the advocacy I think we do, and like why it's so important. And so also how does my advocacy kind of transitioning with that to in adapt help with my disability? I think, well, okay, to sort of back up a little bit. So I went to I don't know, Nina talked about this camp. I know there are a bunch of our adapt members that went to the summer camp out on Long Island as kids. It's called the Southampton Fresh Air Home, and that was where I met Nina and a bunch of other members, Athena, Jess Tambor, Jessica De La Rosa, Kat Downs. A lot of us met as kids at that summer camp. And I think that was really my first experience with like building like disability community, really. Meeting other disabled kids and like I knew other disabled kids. I went for preschool to a like an inclusive where it was like half disabled kids and half kind of able-bodied kids like program, and my elementary school had a fair amount of disabled kids, so it wasn't like I didn't know any disabled kids before I went to summer camp, but it wasn't right like an environment that was built for us. And I think that was kind of the difference, where it was an environment that was built for us and that we could kind of form community. And a lot of my friends that I made there are my lifelong friends. I mean, I've known since I was maybe 13.
Wow,
and
that's crazy.
yeah, so it is really cool. Jess De La Rosa I've known since I was 8. I think actually Kat Downs I've known since I was 9. So it's really, really crazy and such a great community. And I think that model for me is kind of what I think really appeals to me about adapt as well. It feels like almost a continuation of that in our adulthood. And our summer camp is really good about doing a lot of as much advocacy as they can do in their kind of position, and they really support us. They're really proud of all of us that are in adapt and working on behalf of the community. So I think, yeah, so that I think adapt kind of, to answer your question, plays that role now in like my adult life, is that again, you're not necessarily in your everyday life going to be surrounded by a lot of other disabled people. And I think with adapt, that kind of gives me that outlet to have that community. But where, right, people understand what you're going through and a lot of your issues, and like especially a lot of these systemic issues, right? Because they're not something that most able-bodied people are really familiar with. So I think advocacy, I think the biggest impact that it's had on my disability is kind of forming that community, that sense of community.
One of the things I find, and I don't know what your opinion is, but like you have to learn so many other different things. Uh, because we have disabilities and we have to fight for different things, we have to learn so much more than an able-bodied person would about so many different issues.
Yeah.
You know, me, because I'm blind, I have to learn about blindness related things, but you know, it all kind of ties in to a lot of different things, and it's interesting. I must say, since I started doing adapt advocacy, I have learned so much more about
So much.
medicating things that I never knew before.
Yeah.
But it,
Right.
like it or
And a
not,
lot of things we didn't want to know that we
no,
wished weren't
yep,
true. Yeah.
it all ties in, because one of the things I was talking to someone about with my church today, because I spoke uh, briefly at, educational about disabilities, was you never know when you're going to become disabled, because
Yeah.
a lot of the people in my church right now are able-bodied, but um, you never know when you can get a disability. And I think it's important to know that all of these resources are out there. And that's one thing that I know we've been fighting for, is making people understand that they don't know when they can become disabled.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think an understanding of that would just be better just for overall in our society, right? Would be better, because even if you don't become disabled in the traumatic way, right, where you have an accident or something, you hopefully, right, you're going to age. We hopefully, if you are able to live long enough, right, you will lose some function in some of your faculties, whether your sight will start to go, or your hearing, or you will become disabled in some form or fashion as you age in general, right? Everyone's bones become more brittle when they age. I'm not to the extent of mine, but so I think, right, and I think when it happens to sort of the general able-bodied population, it is something that is very depressing for them, right? They're somehow not prepared for it, even though, cognitively or consciously, okay, yes, I'm going to get older. But then when it starts to happen to you, I think our society is so afraid of it. I think they has such a discomfort with it that it is really needlessly, um, jarring and like traumatic for just able-bodied people to get older, right? They feel like the sense of loss, and I don't think
it's a
if
shock
they
for
had
them.
a more what'd you say?
It's a shock for them if something happens. Like, I think a lot of the able-bodied community thinks that, oh, it's not going to happen to me. Well,
Right.
you don't know. I mean,
We
I'm
don't know, and something happens to everyone, right? Obviously, different degrees of things
yep,
happen to different people, but if you live long enough, something is going to happen, right? Even if it's not like fully disabling.
I'm totally blind, but that doesn't mean that something had happened to me where I could have another disability in addition to that. So,
Of course, yeah. Right.
um,
Exactly.
one thing I've learned,
Right. That's a good point too, right? Just because one thing happens to you, right,
right?
doesn't mean nothing else is ever going to happen to you again. That's so true. And I think, right, I think that awareness is really important. And that's part of what our advocacy does, I think, as well, just like making the general population just like also, I think making us approachable, right, to them, because I think there's so much fear surrounding disability and like loss of function, and um such like an ableist narrative, right, in our society about what is valued, right? That the hope is that you are this like strong, healthy, perfectly healthy person for the rest of your life. Obviously, no one wants to suffer, but at the same time, like maybe there are these resources for you, and it won't be so bad, right? You can kind of open yourself up to that experience.
Yeah, I
So
think
I think that's a really good point.
the educational awareness is not as out there as it should be. Uh,
Right. I mean, even for disabled people who are just disabled already, right?
mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to really and that's why I think our organizations are so important, both like ADAPT and the more sort of structured ones like the Centers for Independent Living are so important, because how would you have access? Certainly Medicaid's not telling you, or Social Security is not telling you all this information. They have an active interest in you not knowing this information to sort of access these resources and just sort of to benefit yourself. So I think that's also a big part of like why that sense of community and meeting other people is so important, and who do have more experience in the disability community and just more knowledge on policy stuff. And I think I'm really proud of what ADAPT does to sort of make that information more accessible to, to everyone. And I think, I even think about like growing up, and my parents, just there was a lot I probably could have benefited from that they just didn't know about, that I'm learning about now, right? Like the different waiver programs and like subsidies and different resources for disabled folks that I didn't know about till I was adult. I probably could have benefited for it for, a number of years prior to this. But so I think making that information public and sort of establishing those guidelines, and how do you access these things? I think sort of doing that work is really important. I think getting that education piece, you're right, is so crucial.
That's true. We do so much, but sometimes we have to fight a heck of a lot, and
Oh yeah.
sometimes more than others. Sometimes it involves, protesting or sending emails and Facebook posts and Twitter messages and stuff like that to get our point across.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is difficult for the able-bodied community sometimes, in one way, is accepting those with disabilities, and somehow integrating us. I mean, we have the ADA, but sometimes it feels like we're not really integrated. Sometimes we're not really accepted. Sometimes either. Sometimes we are, but
Yeah.
sometimes we're not.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with just the framing of the ADA to begin with, right? The ADA is created as like almost this. I think, right, the framing of the ADA is not necessarily from an integration standpoint, right? It's saying, oh, these are accommodations you have to make, right, so that we can be integrated. And I think part of the problem of the framing of that is that it's it makes it feel like burdensome to businesses, to others that have to accommodate us. And I think that it creates this like tension or resentment that is harmful for that sort of project of integration. And I think, right, it feels like the way it's framed, it's like, oh, this is sort of the special stuff that you need that, we can choose to give you or not, basically. And the public sort of perception of that, I think, has been almost detrimental to that project, right, of full disability integration.
Oh, I definitely agree with that one. Um, if you had any advice to give someone that's watching this video right now that's struggling with their disability, what advice would you give someone that might be watching us talk about all of this? How could they benefit from either advocacy or something else like that?
I think the number one thing is finding a way to be a part of like the disabled community, because not only for the advocacy component or the resources, but also just for like the social support and emotional support. I think that one of the greatest antidotes to struggling with an aspect of your disability is finding someone with your disability who maybe has had that experience, or a similar experience, or maybe it doesn't necessarily have to lead to them informing you about a program, but I think it could just be, oh, I had a similar situation, this is how I've dealt with it, or or at least could like empathize with you in some way. And I think that that is kind of one of the strongest antidotes, I think, to like to or kind of things that you can do to mitigate any kind of struggles with your disability for sure.
Is there any final tidbits of information you want to pass on to the viewers?
Um, maybe I don't know if you can link the. I'm always shamelessly plugging for Adapt, so if you can put the information down there in case anyone viewing wants to join us, that would be great. But I think also just let me think. Is there anything I want to share? Um, right, I would love to plug Adapt, but I also think that just reiterating the importance of finding something in your local community, also something that you really enjoy doing to kind of help foster that integration. Like I know, um, obviously, the disability advocacy stuff is important, but also other things like in your local community, finding things you really enjoy doing, and hopefully that is something that can also provide a way to feel more integrated. But I think definitely, if you can just share some of the resources, that'd be great. So Adapt, we have the downstate New York chapter, but they're obviously nationwide, and kind of getting more involved with that is, always something I recommend.
So we will definitely link that in the description below with the website. I would definitely like to, of course, thank Simone for taking the time to do this. I hope that everybody that's watching this video right now has enjoyed hearing from her. You may be hearing from her and others throughout some more appearances on this channel. So, Simone, I would once again like to thank you for taking the time to
Thank you for having me. That was great.
do an interview with us, and you may be hearing from her and others again. So, if this is your first time watching this video, of course, definitely like and subscribe to this channel and give it a thumbs up, because that's how we get the word out there. And make sure you ring the notification bell. So until next time, everybody, peace out.